Please give it up for Mr. Richard Dean Anderson!
In 2013, Richard Dean Anderson shocked Hollywood by walking away from over $30 million worth of projects. He was just 63 years old. His career was in full swing. Studios were begging him to return to television. Producers were pitching reboots of his iconic shows. Fans around the world wanted more MacGyver, more Stargate, more of the characters that had defined their childhoods and inspired a generation. But Anderson had a secret. What Hollywood insiders reveal about Anderson's decision is sobering. It wasn't just a career choice or a typical retirement. It was the culmination of decades of physical punishment, relentless schedules, and a realization that fame had cost him something far more valuable than any paycheck could provide. Anderson's decision to vanish from Hollywood wasn't spontaneous. It was driven by something far deeper than simple burnout. The man who had once been one of television's most bankable stars, whose face was recognized worldwide, whose characters had become cultural icons. This man chose silence over stardom, obscurity over fame, peace over profit. What happened during his MacGyver years changed him so profoundly that he made a decision few in Hollywood could understand. He walked away at the height of his earning potential, turned down millions, and never looked back. The physical toll of performing his own stunts, the exhaustion of carrying 2 hit series on his shoulders, the years of pushing through injuries that would have sidelined most actors, all of it led to a moment of clarity that changed everything. What did Hollywood do to Richard Dean Anderson that made him choose this path? This is the real reason Richard Dean Anderson vanished from Hollywood, and it's a story about the true cost of fame, the price of being an action hero, and the courage it takes to walk away when everyone is telling you to stay. Richard Dean Anderson was born on January 23, 1950, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, though his family had briefly been in Dawson Creek, British Columbia, just before his birth. He grew up in Roseville, Minnesota, a working-class suburb where dreams were nurtured but expectations were practical. His father, Stuart Anderson, worked as a teacher and played jazz bass on the side, bringing music and creativity into their home. His mother, Jocelyn, was an artist whose work filled their modest house with color and imagination. The Anderson household was alive with creative energy. Jazz records played constantly. The smell of oil paint hung in the air, and Stuart's involvement in high school theater productions meant that young Richard was exposed to performance from an early age. He would sit in the back of auditoriums watching his father direct rehearsals, absorbing the magic of actors transforming into characters, the power of storytelling, the electricity of live performance. But it was an oddly specific memory that Richard would later cite as a turning point in his relationship with theater. During one rehearsal, he watched actors use Twinkies as a stand-in for birthday cake in a scene. This small detail, the practicality of it, the creativity, the fact that the actors got to eat Twinkies as part of their job, captivated young Richard. He joked later in life that from that moment, he decided any career that came with free Twinkies was worth pursuing. It was a humorous recollection, but it spoke to something real. His early understanding that acting could be both an art form and a practical way to make a living doing something creative. Growing up in a working-class environment meant that the Anderson family didn't have much in terms of material wealth. Richard learned early to make do with limited resources. He delivered newspapers to earn spending money, helped around the house, and understood that success would require hard work and determination. These early lessons in perseverance would serve him well in the unpredictable world of Hollywood, though they would also contribute to a work ethic that would eventually drive him past the point of exhaustion. But before acting became his focus, Richard had another dream: hockey. In Minnesota, hockey wasn't just a sport, it was a way of life, a potential path to glory. Richard was obsessed with the game, spending hours on frozen ponds perfecting his skating, his shooting, his defensive play. He was good enough to earn praise from hockey legends like Stan Mikita, good enough to imagine a future in professional hockey. Then, at just 16 years old, his dreams shattered, literally. Richard broke both of his arms in back-to-back incidents within a short period of time. The first break was devastating enough, but the second, coming before the first had fully healed, was career-ending for his hockey ambitions. No professional team would take a chance on a player with that kind of injury history, especially at such a young age. The loss sent Richard into a deep depression. Hockey had been more than just a sport. It had been his identity, his future, his escape from the limitations of a working-class upbringing. Without it, he felt adrift, purposeless. But it was during this dark period, while recovering from his injuries, that a new path emerged. Unable to play hockey, Richard turned to the drama department at his high school. With casts still on his arms, he auditioned for plays, discovering that the same intensity and physicality he had brought to the ice could be channeled into performance. Acting became his new obsession, his new way forward. And unlike hockey, where one bad break could end everything, acting offered multiple chances, different roles, various paths to success. Richard threw himself into this new passion with the same determination he had once brought to hockey practice, never imagining that decades later, the physical demands of his acting career would exact their own toll on his body. The pain of losing his hockey dreams never fully left Richard, but he channeled that loss into fuel for his new passion. Acting wasn't just a fallback, it became a calling, a way to prove to himself that he could still achieve something significant despite the setback that had derailed his original plans. Even as a teenager, Richard demonstrated an adventurous spirit that bordered on reckless. At 17, he embarked on a cross-country bicycle ride from Minnesota to Alaska, spending 33 days alone on the road. This wasn't a supported tour with safety nets. This was a kid on a bike with minimal supplies, pedaling through extreme conditions. He encountered a snowstorm in New Mexico with winds reaching 105 miles per hour, weather that forced experienced travelers off the road. But Richard pushed through, arriving in Alaska having proven to himself that he could endure anything if he was determined enough. This willingness to push past normal limits, to test himself against extreme conditions, would become both Richard's greatest strength and his ultimate vulnerability in Hollywood. In 1976, at age 26, Richard made the move to Los Angeles. Like thousands of aspiring actors before him, he arrived with big dreams and no guarantees. The early years were a patchwork of odd jobs and small roles. One of his strangest gigs was working with whales at a marine show. Not exactly the path to stardom, but it taught him how to perform under pressure, how to work with an unpredictable co-star, and how to stay calm when things didn't go according to plan. He also spent time in New York City, honing his craft on stage. Theater taught him discipline, helped him develop his range, and gave him the foundation that would later allow him to carry television series on his shoulders. But it was daytime television that provided his first major break. In 1976, Richard was cast as Dr. Jeff Weber on the soap opera General Hospital. It was steady work, reliable income, and exposure to millions of viewers every weekday. His character appeared in over 600 episodes, and by 1979, General Hospital had become the #1 daytime drama in America. Richard's face was becoming familiar to television audiences. His name was beginning to circulate in Hollywood circles, and his career seemed poised to take off. But success in soap operas didn't automatically translate to primetime success. Richard faced significant setbacks with 2 CBS shows, 7 Brides for 7 Brothers and Emerald Point NAS. Both were canceled after just 1 season, the kind of failures that can easily derail a rising career. For every actor who breaks through to major stardom, there are dozens who get stuck in the cycle of failed pilots and canceled series. Richard could have easily become one of those cautionary tales, a whatever happened to answer on a trivia night. Instead, in 1985, everything changed. Richard auditioned for a new ABC series about an unconventional secret agent who solved problems using science and ingenuity rather than guns and violence. The character was Angus MacGyver, and Richard approached the audition with his characteristic unpretentious style. He even wore his glasses during the reading, something most actors would never do when auditioning for an action hero role. But that authenticity was exactly what the producers were looking for. They didn't want a typical action star. They wanted someone who could make MacGyver's intelligence and resourcefulness believable. Someone who felt approachable rather than superhuman. Richard got the role, and MacGyver premiered in September 1985. The show was an immediate success, resonating with audiences tired of the hyper-violent action shows that dominated the 1980s. MacGyver solved problems with paperclips, duct tape, and chocolate bars. He used science and creativity rather than weapons. The character became iconic, influencing how an entire generation thought about problem-solving and inspiring countless young people to pursue careers in science and engineering. Richard contributed significantly to making the character work. He suggested creative solutions based on his own experiences. The famous paperclip bomb came from experiments Richard had done as a kid. He insisted on performing many of his own stunts to maintain the show's authenticity. And he worked grueling hours, often filming 5 days a week with minimal breaks, carrying a show that increasingly relied on his presence in nearly every scene. But this dedication came at a severe cost. In 1987, while filming a running scene, Richard injured a disc in his back. The pain was excruciating, but the show had to continue. Production schedules didn't allow for extended recovery time. Richard began taking painkillers to manage the agony, numbing himself enough to keep working while his body tried to heal from an injury that required rest he wasn't being given. The back injury never fully healed. Throughout the remaining years of MacGyver, Richard worked through chronic pain, taking medication to get through filming days, pushing his body beyond reasonable limits. He developed a pattern that would define the rest of his television career: ignore the warning signs, push through the pain, prioritize the show over his health. By 1991, 6 years into MacGyver's run, Richard's body had reached its breaking point. During filming, he collapsed on set, suffering from severe dehydration and complete exhaustion. Medical evaluation revealed that his body was operating at approximately 20% of normal capacity. He was, in medical terms, running on fumes. His doctors were alarmed. His colleagues were concerned. But Richard was still under contract, and the show was still successful. Walking away wasn't simple. The 7th season of MacGyver would be its last, ending in 1992. Richard's decision to leave, framed publicly as a creative choice, was actually a medical necessity. His body had given everything it could give, and continuing would have led to permanent, potentially irreversible damage. He was only 42 years old, but he felt decades older. After MacGyver ended, Richard took time to recover, both physically and emotionally. The 7 years on the show had been rewarding professionally but devastating personally. His relationships had suffered. His body was damaged. His energy was depleted. He needed time away from the relentless grind of television production. But Hollywood doesn't let successful actors rest for long. By the mid-1990s, Richard was being courted for new projects. In 1997, he was offered the lead role in Stargate SG-1, a science fiction series based on the 1994 film Stargate. The character, Colonel Jack O'Neill, would become another iconic role in Richard's career. But this time, Richard approached the job very differently. He had learned from his MacGyver experience that the traditional television schedule was unsustainable for him. So when negotiating his Stargate SG-1 contract, Richard made a demand that shocked the producers. He would only work 3 days per week. For a lead actor on a television series, this was virtually unheard of. Lead actors typically work 5 or even 6 days per week during production. But Richard's negotiating position was strong. He was a proven television star with name recognition, and the producers reluctantly agreed. Richard's motivation for this unusual arrangement was deeply personal. His daughter, Wiley Quinn Anderson, was born in 1998, and Richard was determined to be present for her childhood in a way that his career had previously made impossible. He had spent his MacGyver years sacrificing everything for his work. Now, with a daughter to raise, he was making a different choice. Being a father was more important than being a star. Despite Richard's reduced schedule, Stargate SG-1 became a massive international success. The show ran for 10 seasons, an extraordinary achievement in science fiction television, and developed a passionate global fan base. Richard's portrayal of Jack O'Neill was critically acclaimed, balancing humor with gravitas, bringing depth to what could have been a one-dimensional military character. The reduced work schedule also meant Richard could demand and receive significant compensation. By 2001, he was earning approximately $200,000 per episode, making him one of the highest-paid actors on television. Over the course of the series, Richard earned tens of millions of dollars, achieving the kind of financial security that meant he would never have to work again if he chose not to. But even with the 3-day work week, the physical demands of the role took their toll. During filming, Richard injured his knee severely. Medical evaluation warned him that continuing to perform physical scenes could result in permanent damage that would affect his mobility for the rest of his life. This was a turning point. Unlike the back injury he had pushed through on MacGyver, this time Richard had the leverage and wisdom to insist on changes. The show's producers responded by adjusting the character. Jack O'Neill was promoted to Brigadier General, a rank that required less field work and more command responsibilities. This creative adjustment allowed Richard to continue with the show while reducing the physical demands on his damaged knee. It was a compromise, not ideal, but necessary. Richard's physical limitations were becoming undeniable. His back injury from MacGyver still caused chronic pain. His knee injury limited his mobility. Years of performing stunts, working long hours, and pushing through pain had left their mark. He was still a compelling actor, still capable of delivering powerful performances, but the action hero days were behind him. By the time Stargate SG-1 ended its run in 2007, Richard was 57 years old. He had spent decades as a television star, created 2 iconic characters, and earned more money than he could spend in several lifetimes. He had also paid a significant physical price for that success. His body bore the evidence of every stunt, every long day on set, every time he had pushed through pain to keep production moving. Richard made occasional appearances in Stargate films and specials over the next few years, but his involvement was limited. He was already beginning to step back, to create distance between himself and the industry that had defined his adult life. And then, in 2013, at age 63, Richard made his decision final. He was done with Hollywood. The offers kept coming. Producers pitched MacGyver reboots with Richard returning to the role. Networks wanted new series. Documentary filmmakers wanted to tell his story. Each offer came with significant money attached, millions of dollars for projects that would have traded on his fame and nostalgia for his iconic characters. Richard turned them all down. Every single one. The money didn't matter. The fame didn't matter. What mattered was peace, health, and time with his daughter. What mattered was living on his own terms rather than Hollywood's schedule. What mattered was finally, after decades of putting his career first, putting himself first. Richard's retreat from Hollywood was as complete as it was intentional. He relocated to Malibu, California, choosing a home that offered privacy and proximity to the ocean. The Pacific had always drawn him. Its vastness, its power, its indifference to human concerns. After years of living in the spotlight, being near something so magnificently indifferent to his fame was therapeutic. But Richard didn't simply withdraw into comfortable retirement. Instead, he redirected his energy toward causes that mattered to him. He became heavily involved with environmental organizations, particularly the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, a marine wildlife conservation group known for its direct action approach to protecting ocean ecosystems. Richard had always been concerned about environmental issues, and now he had the time and resources to make a genuine difference. His work with Sea Shepherd wasn't just ceremonial. Richard participated in campaigns, lent his voice to fundraising efforts, and used his celebrity, carefully, selectively, to draw attention to issues like illegal fishing, whaling, and marine habitat destruction. It was activism grounded in genuine passion rather than the performative environmentalism sometimes practiced by celebrities seeking good publicity. He also focused intensely on being present for his daughter Wiley's life. All those years of working 3-day weeks on Stargate had been preparation for this, a life where being dad was the primary role, and everything else was secondary. Richard attended school events, coached sports, helped with homework, and provided the kind of consistent, engaged presence that his grueling MacGyver schedule would never have allowed. Financially, Richard was more than secure. His earnings from 2 hit television series, combined with wise investments and careful management, meant he would never have to worry about money. He didn't need to work. He didn't need the validation of another role, another series, another chance to prove himself. He had already proven everything he needed to prove. What Richard discovered in retirement was something that had eluded him during his years of fame: contentment. Not the adrenaline rush of success or the validation of fan adoration, but genuine, sustainable contentment. He could wake up without a call time. He could make plans without checking a production schedule. He could let his body rest and heal without feeling guilty about production delays. The entertainment industry occasionally tried to lure him back. When CBS rebooted MacGyver in 2016, there were hopes that Richard might make a cameo appearance or provide some blessing to the new series. He declined. The new MacGyver was someone else's story to tell. Richard had made peace with letting go, with allowing the character to exist without his involvement. In interviews during this period, the rare times Richard agreed to speak with media, he was candid about his choices. He talked about the physical toll of his television career, about the chronic pain he still managed, about the realization that he had been destroying his body for the sake of entertainment. He expressed no regret about his decision to walk away. If anything, his only regret was not walking away sooner. Richard Dean Anderson's story illuminates an aspect of television production that audiences rarely see: the physical price that actors, particularly action stars, pay for our entertainment. When we watch MacGyver disarm a bomb or escape from captivity, we're watching Richard push his body to its limits. When we see Jack O'Neill in a firefight or navigating an alien planet, we're seeing the cumulative effect of thousands of stunts and physically demanding scenes. Modern television production operates on brutal schedules. Network shows typically produce 20 to 24 episodes per season, with each episode requiring 8 to 10 days of filming. Lead actors work 50 to 60 hours per week during production, often for 9 or 10 months straight. There are no off-seasons anymore, no extended breaks. The machine runs constantly, and actors are expected to keep pace. For actors who perform their own stunts, as Richard insisted on doing for much of his career, the risks multiply exponentially. Every fight scene, every fall, every running sequence carries the potential for injury. And because production schedules are inflexible, actors often continue working through injuries that would sideline anyone else. Pain medication, anti-inflammatories, cortisone injections, these become tools for keeping the machine running, regardless of the long-term consequences. Richard's back injury on MacGyver was a perfect example. A disc injury requires rest, physical therapy, and time to heal. Instead, Richard took painkillers and kept working, filming action sequences that placed additional stress on an already damaged spine. The result was chronic pain that would follow him for decades, long after MacGyver ended its run. His knee injury on Stargate followed a similar pattern. By that point in his career, Richard had enough leverage to demand accommodations, the promotion to general that reduced his physical scenes. But the damage was already done. The injury left him with permanent limitations on his mobility, affecting not just his career but his quality of life. Beyond the physical injuries, there's the exhaustion that comes from being the face of a successful television series. Richard was in nearly every scene of MacGyver. The show's success depended on his presence, his performance, his ability to carry each episode. That level of responsibility creates enormous pressure. You can't have an off day. You can't ask for time off. The entire production, hundreds of jobs, millions of dollars in investment, depends on you showing up and delivering. Richard's collapse on the MacGyver set in 1991 was the inevitable result of years of accumulated stress and exhaustion. His body had been sending warning signals for years. The back injury, the chronic pain, the fatigue. He had ignored those signals because the show had to continue, because people were depending on him, because walking away felt like failure. When he finally collapsed, his body had simply run out of resources. There was nothing left to give. In a culture that celebrates hustle, that valorizes working through pain, that treats self-sacrifice as a virtue, Richard Dean Anderson's decision to walk away from Hollywood represents a different kind of courage. It takes tremendous strength to say no when everyone around you is telling you to keep going, to push harder, to capitalize on your success. Hollywood is particularly brutal in this regard. Who died too young, with cautionary tales of actors who worked until their bodies gave out, who died too young, who sacrificed their health and happiness on the altar of fame. Richard had seen enough of that world to know he didn't want to become another cautionary tale. His decision in 2013 wasn't impulsive. It was the culmination of years of reflection and gradual withdrawal. The 3-day workweek on Stargate was the first step, an acknowledgement that the traditional television schedule was unsustainable for him. The limited appearances in Stargate films after the series ended was another step, testing what it felt like to work occasionally rather than constantly. By 2013, the decision to stop entirely was simply the logical conclusion of a process that had been unfolding for years. What makes Richard's choice particularly powerful is what he walked away from. This wasn't a washed-up actor with no options. This was a man with millions of dollars in offers on the table, with studios eager to work with him, with fans clamoring for his return. He could have easily coasted on nostalgia for another decade, earning substantial money for limited work. Many actors in his position would have taken those deals without hesitation. But Richard understood something that eludes many people in Hollywood. Money and fame are not the same as fulfillment. He had earned more than enough money to live comfortably for the rest of his life. He had achieved fame on a level that few actors ever reach. What he hadn't had, what all the success in the world couldn't provide, was peace, health, and time with his daughter. So he chose those things instead. He chose mornings without call times. He chose the ability to take vacations without coordinating with production schedules. He chose being present for his daughter's life rather than being absent for the sake of another season, another film, another project. He chose himself over his image, his well-being over his brand. Richard Dean Anderson's legacy in television is secure. MacGyver and Stargate SG-1 were both cultural phenomenons that influenced how stories could be told on television. MacGyver proved that action heroes didn't need to rely on violence, that intelligence and creativity could be as compelling as explosions and gunfights. The character inspired a generation of young people to view science and problem-solving as exciting rather than boring. Stargate SG-1 demonstrated that science fiction television could sustain itself for a decade, that genre shows could find mainstream success, that serialized storytelling could work in episodic television. Richard's portrayal of Jack O'Neill, balancing humor with military authority, showing vulnerability alongside strength, helped redefine what a military character could be on screen. But perhaps Richard's most important legacy is the example he set by walking away. In an industry that chews people up and spits them out, that treats actors as commodable assets rather than human beings, Richard demonstrated that it's possible to set boundaries, to prioritize health over career, to say enough is enough. His story offers several crucial lessons for anyone working in demanding fields. Listen to your body. Richard's back injury on MacGyver was his body's way of saying it needed rest. Ignoring that signal and pushing through the pain led to chronic issues that affected him for decades. Physical limitations aren't weakness, they're information. Success isn't worth destroying yourself. MacGyver made Richard famous and wealthy, but it also damaged his back, exhausted him to the point of collapse, and took years off his life expectancy through stress and overwork. Was it worth it? Richard's decision to walk away from millions more suggests he concluded it wasn't. You have the right to change your mind about what you want. In his 20s and 30s, Richard wanted fame and success. By his 50s and 60s, he wanted peace and time with family. Both desires were valid. Recognizing when your priorities have shifted and acting accordingly isn't failure, it's wisdom. Financial success should serve your life, not define it. Richard earned enough money to never work again, and then he made the decision to actually not work again. How many people accumulate wealth but never feel secure enough to stop? Richard's story reminds us that money is a tool for living the life you want, not an end in itself. Fame is not fulfillment. Being recognized, being celebrated, having your face on magazines and your name in headlines, none of that guarantees happiness or contentment. Richard found more fulfillment working with Sea Shepherd and spending time with his daughter than he ever found in the spotlight. Today, Richard Dean Anderson lives quietly in Malibu, far from the Hollywood spotlight that once defined his life. Now, in his mid-70s, he enjoys the kind of peaceful existence that seemed impossible during his television years. His days are his own. No production schedules, no script revisions, no early morning call times. He remains involved with environmental causes, though his participation is now more behind the scenes than public-facing. His work with various conservation organizations continues, reflecting his long-standing commitment to protecting the planet for future generations. It's activism without fanfare, contribution without seeking recognition. His relationship with his daughter Wiley remains central to his life. Now in her 20s, she has benefited from having a father who chose to be present rather than perpetually absent for career reasons. Richard's decision to work 3-day weeks on Stargate and then to retire entirely gave Wiley something that many children of famous parents never have: a dad who was actually there. Occasionally, Richard will grant an interview or make a rare public appearance, usually in service of a cause he believes in. But these are exceptions to his general rule of privacy. He has no social media presence, no desire to maintain a public profile, no interest in staying relevant to a new generation of viewers. He lived his life in the spotlight for decades. Now he's content to live it in private. The MacGyver reboot that ran from 2016 to 2021 proceeded without his involvement or blessing. Richard had made peace with letting go of the character, with allowing others to reinterpret MacGyver for a new generation. He didn't need to be part of it. That chapter of his life was closed, and he had no interest in reopening it. When asked about potential future projects, whether he might ever return to acting for the right role or the right amount of money, Richard's answer has been consistent. No, not for nostalgia, not for money, not to satisfy fans who want to see him on screen again. He made his decision in 2013, and nothing has changed his mind since. His body still bears the scars of his television career. The back that aches, the knee that doesn't bend quite right, the accumulated damage of decades of physically demanding work. Those scars serve as daily reminders of why he walked away, of what continuing would have cost. Richard Dean Anderson's story could have ended very differently. He could have been another actor who worked until his body completely broke down, who died too young, who sacrificed everything for fame that ultimately proved hollow. Instead, he chose to write his own ending, one where he survived his success, where he prioritized life over career, where he found peace in obscurity rather than validation in the spotlight. Richard Dean Anderson's decision to walk away from Hollywood wasn't just about leaving behind a career, it was about reclaiming a life. For decades, he had been MacGyver, Jack O'Neill, a television star whose identity was inseparable from the characters he played. His body had become a tool for entertainment, pushed to its limits and beyond for the sake of ratings and fan satisfaction. But beneath the famous characters and the iconic roles, there was a person, a man with a damaged back, an injured knee, chronic pain, and a growing realization that fame couldn't fill the emptiness left by sacrificing his health and personal life. The man who had once pushed through blizzards on a bicycle ride to Alaska, who had endured broken arms and shattered hockey dreams, who had collapsed on a television set from sheer exhaustion. This man finally learned the hardest lesson of all, knowing when to stop. His story stands in stark contrast to the narrative Hollywood usually tells about success. We're taught to hustle harder, to never give up, to push through pain and exhaustion because that's what it takes to make it. Richard did all of that. He pushed through injuries that should have stopped him. He worked through exhaustion that should have sidelined him. He achieved the kind of success that most actors can only dream about. And then he looked at what that success had cost him and decided it wasn't worth continuing. That decision, to walk away from millions of dollars, from adoring fans, from the validation of being wanted and needed, required a different kind of courage than performing dangerous stunts or carrying a television series on your shoulders. It required the courage to disappoint people, to leave money on the table, to accept that enough was enough. Today, Richard Dean Anderson is not a cautionary tale about Hollywood destroying someone. He's an example of someone who survived Hollywood by having the wisdom to leave before it destroyed him completely. His legacy isn't just MacGyver's ingenuity or Jack O'Neill's humor. It's the example of a man who chose peace over profit, health over fame, life over career. For anyone grinding themselves down in pursuit of success? For anyone sacrificing their well-being for their work? For anyone wondering if it's okay to step back even when everyone is telling you to push forward? Richard Dean Anderson's story offers a powerful answer. Yes, it's not just okay to walk away. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do. In the end, Richard Dean Anderson didn't vanish from Hollywood because Hollywood broke him. He vanished because he was smart enough to leave before it could. And somewhere in Malibu, far from the cameras and the crowds, he's living proof that sometimes the greatest success is knowing when you've had enough and having the courage to walk away.